Juggler was near. There's quite a few other rares that Knife Juggler could be. I would probably put Sunwalker in the top 10% of rares that you could see, but Juggler is probably in the top 1 or 2%. And so we definitely take the Knife Juggler. Let's talk a little bit about why this guy is so good. Okay, so first I mentioned that 2 mana for a 2/3 or a 3/2 is really where you want to be in that 2 mana slot. This guy fills that perfectly. What puts this guy over the top is his ability. We already talked about how those hero powers that deal 1 damage are really good. Well, this guy's got an ability printed on him that essentially does the same thing. It is random, uh, but again, if you're not familiar with Knife Juggler's abilities, after you summon a minion, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. And so whenever you play a minion after this guy, it will randomly shoot a knife at either opponent's hero or a minion. Uh, Again, this guy allows you to trade up very effectively. Sometimes he can sneak that damage in on your opponent's face that you need to get to lethal. It's just a very powerful power, especially in arena, where that 1 damage can really make the difference between your minions being able to trade with your opponent's minions. So we're going to take Knife Juggler again here again. Again, Sunwalker is very good, but Knife Juggler is just kind of the cream of the crop. Definitely the best choice in this situation. It is worth noting that Knife Juggler doesn't really synergize particularly well with any of the rogue cards or the rogue hero power. It does synergize slightly with Defiance Ringleader as it makes 2 minions for 1 card. But again, Knife Juggler is just such a high quality 2-drop, we really need to take it. Again, it really helps. It's an early play, very strong early play. Really helps us. A great start to this draft, great start to our curve. Alright, so we've got 2 common cards and basic cards. This is kind of a common slot. This is what most of your picks are going to look like during Arena. This is a pretty interesting set of cards here. So Conceal is not very good. Obviously, if you're used to Constructed, you've probably seen Concealed and Constructed in the Miracle Rogue decks and probably hate this card with a passion, as it always makes stealths their auctioneer, draws them a card, can't do anything about it, next turn you just die to some ridiculous combo. Well, unfortunately for us, it's not quite what it does in Arena. Since the constructed decks are very well tuned, very refined, and very well built, since there's a random factor in Arena, a card as narrow and specific as Concealed, really, you're not really going to get the same applications out of it. I mean, we could end up seeing an Auctioneer, we could end up seeing it's pretty good with Van Cleef. If we see cards like that, it could end up being good. This really is, especially as a second pick in our draft, this is not the kind of card we want to take. Again, it's a very narrow card. Kind of like Mana Wrath, it's the kind of card that late in the draft, if you're looking back at your deck and you see this and you got an Auctioneer, it's not impossible to draft the Miracle Rogue deck if you get Leroy and some Shadow Steps. But, I mean, generally I would discourage between picking these narrow cards with the hope that you pick up an Auctioneer or something like that. So, and even if you do get an Auctioneer, it's not necessarily going to be as good in Arena, because you also want to pick a lot of minions, as having minions in Arena really helps you build that curve, and it's one of the best ways to win. So, we're going to pass over Conceal here. Again, very narrow card. Not a card I would consider until very late in the draft, where you can look back at your card and see if it does have any applications. So our next card is Sinister Strike. Again, this is a very narrow card. The only thing it does is 3 damage to the enemy hero. You're never going to be able to remove a minion with this card. It's going to get no value outside of the ability to do damage straight to your opponent's face. Dealing damage to the opponent is not very valuable. Especially in Arena, you really want to play a very grindy game where you're trying to edge out advantage over your opponent. That's why cards like Knife Juggler are so good, is sometimes that the power on the ability on Knife Juggler can get you as much as a full card's worth of value, and Knife Juggler can be a two for one. So, I mean, this is kind of just a basic exercise in card advantage. So Sinister Strike is a 0 for 1. Usually you want to look for 2 for 1s or better. I mean, you at least want your cards to be 1 for 1s. The only time where you really want to play Sinister Strike is if it's going to kill your opponent. It is okay, again, this is another card that's decent with Gadgetzan Auctioneer, but that's not a card you want to build around in Arena. You're going to end up with a very clunky, inconsistent deck if you're full of mediocre spells and 1 or 2 Auctioneers. So again, a card we want to pass over. This is another card, if you're looking late in the draft and you've got a very, very aggressive deck, it could be a card worth considering, as it does give you a lot of reach being your ability to deal burn damage straight to your opponent's face. So, again, there could be some situations where you would take this card, but not this early in the draft, and generally it's not a card you're going to want to be taking. Vendrico Mercenary, I'm actually kind of glad this guy came up. He's a really interesting card for Arena. So as a 5-mana 7/6, he's very, very aggressively costed. Uh, he's way above curve for his stats, which makes him really powerful in Arena. When you're playing this guy on turn 5 and your opponent's playing like the Silverhand Knight or Silverhand Recruit, the guy who makes a 4/4 and a 2/2, which is one of the better 5-drops in Arena. Like this, that just pales in comparison to a 7/6. So he's a really powerful minion, really lets you push damage. One of this card's biggest drawbacks in Constructed is the popularity of Big Game Hunter. Well, odds are your opponent's not going to get that epic Big Game Hunter, and even if they are offered a Big Game Hunter, there's usually a lot of other good epics they have an option of picking too. So Vendrico Mercenary, very powerful. His drawback is a real drawback, though. Your minions cost 3 more. Because Arena is often so minion-centric, this really does hinder you from playing your minions. Generally, you want to try to top your... When you play this guy, you kind of want to make sure that you're topping off with this guy, and you're in a position that if this guy is not dealt with, your opponent just loses the game. So we're going to pick this guy largely on the back of how poor the other 2 cards are, but he is. I generally do value this guy fairly highly in Arena, just because of how powerful and how above curve he is. He's also a you really don't. He's also kind of a bigger drop. You really don't mind paying the 5 mana for this guy because he is so aggressively costed compared to what you usually get for a 5-drop. So we're going to go and take this guy. He's an awesome addition here to our deck. Alright, so here's a kind of another interesting set of choices. These are all fairly mediocre choices. None of these cards is a real standout. So, well, they've all got Charge, which is kind of interesting. I mean, Charge is a very powerful mechanic in Arena. Allows you to essentially use these cards as removal spells. And I think it really comes down to 2 cards here. Either the Stormwind Knight or the Wolf Rider. So the reason why I don't want to take the Bluegill Warrior is he's very easy to remove. He is a 2-drop, but he's just... you do need to value what your cards do. So if we have a single card, the Wolf Rider does more for 1 card than the Bluegill Warrior does. And I think we're okay paying that extra mana for it, even if we do value 2-drops pretty highly. The Bluegill Warrior isn't the kind of 2-drop you want to value highly. You want to value those 2/3s and those 3/2s pretty highly, as they allow you to build your board. That's really why you want the 2-drops, is to build a board, progress your board, and be able to trade effectively against your opponent. The Bluegill Warrior is usually always just going to be a 1-for-1. He's not even going to trade very effectively against 2-drops your opponent might play that are 2/3s. So really not the kind of 2-drop we're looking for. Wolf Rider, on the other hand, will trade for most minions in the 2 and 3 mana slot, and some minions in the 4 mana slot. So Wolf Rider has a fair number of applications. You can often use him just as a 3 mana, 3 damage removal spell. He's a very strong card, definitely worth considering. Stormwind Knight, on the other hand, he's a little beefier than these other 2 guys, having 5 health. I tend to prefer consistent and resilient cards, so I think we're going to take the Stormwind Knight here, but it really could be either the Stormwind Knight or the Wolf Rider. If we're later in the draft and felt we had a very, very aggressive deck, I would definitely opt for the Wolf Rider here, and maybe even the Bluegill Warrior if that filled our curve a little bit better, if we're, let's say, overloaded on 3-drops. But at this point, we don't have a lot of 4-drops. Stormwind Knight is a reasonable 4-drop. Again, he will usually 2-for-1 more often than Wolf Rider or Bluegill Warrior. It's very hard to 2-for-1 with Wolf Rider and Bluegill Warrior. Really, if I picked Wolf Rider, it would be because of his applications as a 3 mana, 3 damage removal spell. Removal being very important in Arena. As we talked about earlier with Mage having great removal, and that's one of the reasons we went Rogue as well. So we're going to opt for Stormwind Knight, just being a little bit beefier, a little bit more consistent than these other 2 guys. He's almost always going to be able to trade reasonably well against the opponent, whereas Wolf Rider will often be in situations where they have, say, a 2/4, some minion that's very difficult for a 3-1 to trade with. So.